They're having a good time? Can you guys hear me back there?
Yes.
Great. There's actually a crack in the stage in 2 places. Watch out. If I fall, it's because there's cracks in the stage. Yes, I'm trying. So welcome everybody. I'm Allyson Anderson-Book. I'm the Associate Director at the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. I'll be your MC for today and tomorrow. We have a great program. I wanted to first say thank you on behalf of the Bureau and the International Regulators Forum for joining us here today. The topic is offshore safety, and we'll be looking at risk mitigation and management from a holistic sense, trying to bring lessons learned from the desktop to the deck plate. We're going to focus on not just talking about risk, but actually getting to some best practices and to the implementation that you can do in the field. This conference is a little bit different than previous years, from what I understand. I have never had the privilege of actually being able to go to the conferences, but I hear that we're a little bit outside the box this time because we're actually pulling people from different fields. What you're going to see in the next 2 days that we pulled in experts from the nuclear industry, aerospace, we have aviation, we had cybersecurity, although that might be the person who can't make it. We have a couple of other fields as well, and you're going to see that everybody who's here brings a really dynamic, different sort of approach to how they look at risk. And we're talking all different kinds of risks throughout the entire supply chain. So I hope that you guys enjoy the program. And I would like to say that in terms of thinking outside of the box, a lot of times we are so focused on a certain problem, and we end up doing that finding a solution the same way every time. By looking at other industries, as history has shown, true innovators pull ideas from other industries or other sectors, and they apply them to their own in a different way. That's what we're trying to do here today, and we hope that you actually experience some of that and have a robust and lively dialogue as we go along. So, I think I forgot my clicker. Let me get this. I'm going to start with a quick safety story to get things going today before we kick off for our event host, which is Brian Salerno, who's over here. I'm going to make him wave. Okay, I'll have an introduction for him in a moment. But I want to start with the safety story because what a better way. Every industry person knows we always start every meeting with a safety moment. Mine's a little bit bigger than your standard safety moment. So I'm going to play a sound for you. Brace yourself, it's going to wake you up. I hope you guys can tell me what the sound is. Any ideas? It's a very familiar, what was that?
Squeaky brakes.
Squeaky brakes, right. Right, you have them. Squeaky brakes, we all know that sound. I'm going to put this out hypothetically. What do you do when you hear that sound? Are you like most people where you ignore it and you think, oh, I'll get to it later, it's not a big deal? Or do you think, when was the last time I turned the rotor? Do I need to replace my brake pads? I'm one of those people who kind of ignores it for a little bit and thinks, oh God, I've got to get it fixed. And by the time you bring it in, it's probably too late and you spend a lot of money. We're here for a risk conference. Hopefully we'll get past that. And when we hear that, it's an early warning indicator. I've got another sound for you. Anybody know what that is? Parking brake. It's really distinct, right? It's a parking brake, but what else does it do for you? It's an emergency brake. So if something goes wrong, you want this to work. So this is a sound you want to hear. So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories here. I'm going to contrast 2 different stories. And what I'm going to show you next is a clip, and I'm going to warn you, it's actually not a good news story, okay? So you might wonder why we're opening up in this way, but everything closes with a nice happy ending, so bear with me. So I'm going to play this for you, and I want you to listen close and read the screen. So what you're going to see in a moment is I'm going to tell a story of two drivers. One is a Lexus driver, and just to warn you, this is someone who actually had a fatal car crash. This is the 911 tape.
911 emergency, what are you reporting?
Yeah, we're in a Lexus.
I'm sorry, your cell phone's cutting out.
We're going north 125, and our accelerator's stuck.
I'm sorry?
Our accelerator's stuck. We're on 125 and we're in brake.
Okay, northbound 125, where are you passing?
We are passing, where are we passing? We're going to 120 Mission Gorge. We're in trouble. We can't, there's no brake.
Okay.
Gorge, end freeway, half mile.
Okay, and you don't have the ability to, like, turn the vehicle off or anything?
We're approaching an intersection.
You should have heard one thing there. The guy said, "Can you turn the vehicle off?" And he didn't hear him, did he? Okay? At this point, the driver was so panicked, I don't think he could hear the 911 operator. What happened was that family died. Okay? That was a case where it was the Lexus on the left, okay? And that is a case where the accelerator pedal was stuck under the floor mat. Okay? If he had his wits about him, he could have done several things. Does anybody know what he could have tried? He could have turned the car off, right? And that's what the 911 operator was telling him to do. He could have also reached down and probably pulled the floor mat. I have a Toyota that had the floor mat problem as well. I just bought new floor mats. But it is scary when it happens. It's very serious. So I want to contrast that. So the Lexus on the left is a very sophisticated car. It has multiple redundant brake systems. It's an anti-lock brake. It had everything going for it, okay? Now let's contrast the one on the right, okay? For those of you who may or may not know what that is, that's a 1998 4Runner, and it's pretty old, right? So the other story I'm going to tell you is a driver in the year 2004, and so by the math, it's about a 16-year-old car, is driving down the Houston freeway. And what happened with that driver is, in a moment where the driver was about to be pinned down, going about 75 miles an hour, they were about to hit an abutment or a vehicle, okay? The driver did what everybody else would have done, is tried to slam on the brakes. In that moment, there was a sound. Listen hard. Can you guys hear? You know what that is? Silence. It's what happens when your brakes fail. The brakes failed on that car. So if you know what happens when the brakes fail, the pedal goes to the floor and nothing happens. So you remember that clicking sound? Okay, the driver tried to pull the emergency brake. What didn't happen? It did not click. That brake failed as well. So in that case, this is a manual transmission. The driver did the only thing left. Putting it actually, turning the car off wouldn't have done it. The driver put it in first gear. So the car did still have a transmission when it was done, though it was a little worse for the wear. That car slowed way down, and the driver was able to exit the freeway and coast to a stop a couple miles later. So compare and contrast those two. Okay, you had one where a person had a sophisticated state-of-the-art car with all the brake systems in the world. But what did that person maybe not have that the other driver did? Well, I'm the driver of the 4Runner, and I live to tell. And the only reason why is because I just had a defensive driving class. At the time, I worked for ExxonMobil. Thank you, ExxonMobil, for the driving class. Okay, I'd just taken that a week before, but I'd also had extensive experience driving many off-road vehicles, tractors, and I had a dad who was vigilant about safety. He taught me everything I did in that car that day, and that is what saved my life. So my point here is that risk is around us every day and we don't realize it. We all take for granted that braking system. What happened when I was on the freeway is that had I looked at the car, that 16-year-old car with 250,000 miles on it, I would have seen that the whole entire undercarriage was rusted out. That was going to happen at any time. The brakes were just about ready to go. I could have mitigated my own risk on the front end by just taking care of my car. So my moral of the story is, like the people offshore who go to work every day and take for granted a lot of the different mechanical pieces that work, it only takes one that can cascade into a whole bunch of other risks and failures. So we're going to talk about that a lot today. And we're going to take this in this way from the desktop to the deck plate. So we'll transition here for a moment. That was my big safety moment, okay? A little bit unconventional. And I want to give you the real deal, which is how do you get out of here in an emergency? All right, as you guys saw, if you want to take a look, back there, exit number 1. Over here, exit number 2. The capital city is a little bit different. We occasionally have flyovers, so for the foreign guests here, don't be alarmed if there were sirens or anything outside. What we need to do is go straight out the front, and we're going to head over towards Union Station. We're just going to walk there calmly. Okay, so that's what you do in the event of an evacuation here. So I would like to take a moment and acknowledge a few people. BSEE in the white shirts. All my staff, if you can stand up. It takes a village, as one of the high-profile presidential candidates likes to say, to raise a family, but it takes a huge village to put on a conference, okay? This team, we can see them back here and over here, have been working for a year to put this event on. I'd like to especially acknowledge Julie Fleming, because she has led this charge, as well as John Northington. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, guys. If you have any questions throughout the day, please identify someone in the white shirts, and they'll help you. Also, while we're doing the Q&As throughout this, they'll be walking around with hand mics. You guys can sit down or stand up as long as you feel like. So a couple of other little logistical things I'd be remiss if I didn't point out. Can I get the sheet? There is a conference guideline sheet. I'll try to wing it. Okay, so I want to point out a couple things in here. Since we are a little bit unconventional in how we're doing this, you're going to see we're transitioning the stage and the set quite a few times. I'll be back here to introduce in between. But one of the things we're asking from you is that we hope this is an interactive dialogue with everybody. We hope you'll make new friends. You saw you had assigned seats. The staff worked very hard to try to make sure you could sit together with someone you may not have met before. You do need to wear your badges at all times to re-enter the event, so please leave your badges on. Electronic devices. We're in a very connected digital age, and everybody wants to see what's going on. There is free Wi-Fi here, but I ask that you just wait until the break. If you get a phone call, please step outside. And if you can't, just go ahead and turn your phone off altogether. That way you'll be able to stay engaged and not distract your neighbor. And the last thing here is, as we're facilitating a discussion here, at any time, as long as the person's not in the middle of a presentation, we hope that people will be interactive throughout this experience. So please come up with some good questions. If you don't like to actually get on the mic yourself, there's some note cards on the table. Every table has them, and you can use that to submit your questions. So this is the part of the program where I start to transition to the main event. So I'm going to take a moment here and introduce someone who I spent a lot of time with, and that is Director Brian Salerno. He's the current chair of the IRF, and as such, he is your event host for today. A couple of words, and it's always awkward when someone introduces you and you're right there in the room, so I'll try not to make it painful. I'd like to say that Brian is an exceptional leader. He started to lead straight out of the starting gate. He's the oldest of, I think, if I can get this right, 8 kids. Yes, I say 6, 10, I never get 8. So he's the oldest of 8 kids. So straight off the starting mark, he has been a born leader. He rose through the ranks after 30-some years of public service and became a vice admiral at the U.S. Coast Guard. He, as you can see here, he is an avid sailor. And I like this picture. I was going to Photoshop in a beer can to make it a little more interesting. but I thought better of it. Okay, it would have been too obvious. So he's going to come up here in a moment and talk a little bit more about risk, but I will say I hope what people take away from his talk and his leadership at our Bureau is he looks for transparency, clarity, and consistency. And I think you'll see that in every activity that we undertake as a Bureau. So with that, I'd like to invite Brian up to the stage, and he will kick off his talk.
All right. Thanks, Allyson.
Yes. Well, I'll shake your hand.
Okay, no worries. Well, good morning, everybody. And I'd like to add my welcome to all of you here to Washington. I know many of you have traveled from great distances to be here today. In fact, we have representatives from over 20 countries here at the conference. So a special welcome to all of those who made the extra long journey to participate with us today. It is our pleasure to host this conference. We have a lot to live up to. The last conference 2 years ago in Perth was, I think, a resounding success. So we spoke a lot with our Australian colleagues from NOPSEMA to help set this up, as well as with many of you. So you all have had a role in putting this together. We are quite confident that this conference will be professionally, I'm going to take my picture off. you don't know how hard I had to look to find a photo without beer cans in the picture, so which would have been a little bit hard to explain to some of my Coast Guard colleagues that are out here. But we've had many of you have participated in the development of this program. It is innovative. It's designed to be a little bit different and thought-provoking. And we're quite sure that you'll walk out of the room maybe with a thought or two that you didn't have when you came in. And that's the purpose. If nothing else, the networking itself, the talent in this room, we can't help but, I think, have a beneficial 2 days. I will add my thanks to the presenters and the moderators who've put a lot of time and effort into planning this, and to all the folks who help do the planning, either the ones in the white shirts, and I guess I feel a little bit out of uniform, which is awkward, but everybody else who we consulted with over the past year to put this together. Our focus, as Allyson indicated, is the practical application of safety culture. That's what it's all about. For many years, the IRF, working with the industry and with academia, have really focused on this. And there's been a lot of effort placed on understanding the core attributes of safety culture and its benefits to the industry. And I would say that we've made a lot of progress, I think, overall as an industry. I doubt that there's any company that does not have a safety plan in place of some form. And regardless of where you operate in the world, a safety plan, some commitment at the corporate level to safety is pretty much the price of admission. All regulators are looking for that. Again, it takes different forms, but it's all there. And in reality, there are many of you who have been working this issue long before it became an area of emphasis for the regulators. There are very mature systems out there. People have been doing this for years, and we all have a lot to learn from them. It's real shining lights in the industry. But it's also true that not everybody's in the same place. We tend to still see gaps in the application of safety culture, disconnects between the rhetoric and the reality. Sometimes it doesn't always play out at the deck plate level. The performance or the behavior of people on deck do not illustrate a true top to bottom commitment to safety culture. And that's really part of our challenge here. Apologize for this thing. I'm not quite used to something hanging off my tie. So there's a gap between rhetoric and reality in many cases. And the reason I say that is just through our regulatory activities, through our inspections, through our root cause analysis after incidents take place, it's pretty clear that the safety culture, the commitment at the top did not percolate all the way down. Now, is that an indictment of the worker? No, it's not meant to be that at all. What I am trying to say is this is hard. It's really hard. It takes a lot of leadership for a safety culture or any policy to go from the corporate boardroom all the way down to the deck plates at multiple levels, that everybody gets it, everybody does what they're supposed to do, even when somebody isn't looking over their shoulder, because it's just built into the way they work. That's hard to accomplish. It's, I think, particularly hard in this industry where so much of the work is done by contractors and subcontractors. So it not only has to go top to bottom, it has to spread out laterally across multiple organizations. That is a huge challenge. That's why, I think we see gaps. It's not easy. But fundamentally, the commitment to safety culture is about more than a statement of intent, and it's about more than a thick plan. It's about how people behave when they're actually doing their job. So that's really the theme of this conference, desktop to deck plate, to get that top to bottom alignment. And I recognize that we're having this discussion at a particularly difficult time for the industry. There are market forces that you're all very familiar with that are putting a lot of stress on the offshore industry. And many companies are having to make extremely difficult decisions just to survive the economic downturn. In many ways, this period will test commitment to safety culture, probably more than anything else. But that's why it's especially important that we have this discussion. So as Allyson mentioned in her introduction, we're trying a different approach here with this conference. we will hear from other voices. We'll hear a range of other industries and how they have approached the problem of looking at safety culture and implementing it right down to the worker level. Now, you may question why are we doing it like this? What's the relevance of talking to other industries, to other organizations, and trying to learn from them? What can we get out of that? And I think those are fair questions, because after all, we have a lot of talent within this industry. People have been very thoughtful about how they've approached safety culture, and as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of shining lights. So why not just listen to them? I mean, those are fair questions. But I guess the counter to that is, do we really believe that we've heard it all? That we've got the last word on safety culture? That there's nothing to learn from anybody else? And are we really sure that we've fully implemented it throughout our industry? And I doubt that any of us would say yes to all of that. Yes, there's always something new to learn. So this is that opportunity. And I want to give credit where credit's due. We didn't invent this concept. Earlier this year, I was fortunate to attend a conference in Houston called Deep Space, Deep Ocean. And I know many of you were there as well. It was hosted by Aramco and NASA and a number of other organizations. And it was a pretty intriguing conference. When you think of deep space and deep ocean, you think, these are really different worlds of work. But when you look at their attributes, they're both focused on operating in very unforgiving environments where the price of failure can be extremely high. They both bring people and technology into close contact, and they work in processes that are very well defined. But they also have to have the flexibility to deviate from an established process when unforeseen circumstances arise. So how do they do that? That conference really kind of put a light bulb off in my head, and I think for many who were in attendance, that it was very well attended. The comments that I heard when I was there said, this is something of value. This is something we need to pursue. And so that actually planted a seed for us in designing this conference. And I'll take it a step further. The Offshore Technology Conference, which is held every year in Houston, this year initiated a fifth day of the conference. They call it the D5 conference, and it was meant to look at technology and people and emerging technologies. What's the next big thing? How will we manage that as an industry? Very intriguing conference, very forward-looking conference. And it was really built on the same idea, looking more broadly across what other industries are doing. And in fact, one of the speakers, and I'll just quote one of them, said that innovation is driven by looking outside one's own field to a range of other areas, regardless of whether the application is deemed immediately obvious or seems immediately obvious. And that really is a powerful thought, and it's one that we wanted to take a hold of and to build into this conference. Now, we all can, I'm sure, if we went around the room, think of examples of where we have borrowed an idea from some other walk of life and applied it to either a personal or professional problem, and we've had good results. Now, I could just go around and ask you for examples, but I won't do that because I thought I'd share you one of my own, and I do have a few clips on it. And it kind of harkens back to my previous life. September 11th, 2001, I was one of 42 Coast Guard captains of the port around the country. And all of us were faced with a very immediate problem. We had to somehow come up with a way to allow maritime commerce to continue while screening out dangerous people, dangerous materials. Now, I was in Boston. The city was really on edge because two of the flights had departed from Logan Airport, which is right in the harbor. And they were extremely nervous about the volatile fuels that transited through the port, in particular liquefied natural gas. So that was my particular problem. I had to solve that. But all of us had to solve it. We were not new to port security. I had trained from port security through most of my career. I cut my teeth boarding Soviet flagged ships, with detectors and so forth. It was not a new game, but this was a new problem. This was not something where we were operating in a hierarchical military command and control structure aligned with national defense policy. This was focused on small terror cells. This required that we interact with the local police, the state police, fire departments, emergency management agencies, the mayor's office, and of course other law enforcement agencies at the federal level. It was a really different problem. And what we did, almost instinctively, because we really didn't have too many other alternatives, how do you manage that? How do you interact with all those elements? And we decided we would use the incident command system. Now, the incident command system's been in use for a number of years, many years, but within the Coast Guard, it was used for a very different purpose. It was used for pollution response. And so we tried to figure out, okay, that's a model that we can apply. I will show in a second here a little bit of a clip, but one of the places where this application was probably the most dramatic on that day, on September 11th, was in New York. So my colleague Dick Bennis managed this. The boat lift was evacuating people from Manhattan, and it had to be done very quickly. There were 500,000 people that needed some means of escape. They couldn't get to the bridges, they couldn't use the roads, they needed a way out. And there was no plan for this. But there were a lot of people who wanted to help, and they just rushed to the scene and had to be organized. So let me just show a quick clip here. This is from a video called Boat Lift. And if you see the full video, you can find it on YouTube. It's narrated by Tom Hanks. It's actually well done, but I'm just going to show a few seconds of it.
The Great Boat Lift of 9/11 became the largest sea evacuation in history. Larger than the evacuation of Dunkirk in World War II, where 339,000 British and French soldiers were rescued over the course of 9 days. On 9/11, nearly 500,000 civilians were rescued from Manhattan by boat. It took less than 9 hours.
Okay. Oops, sorry. So that was just a short clip. It's actually a pretty good video, as I mentioned, if you are inclined to see it. But 500,000 people, dozens of Coast Guard vessels, but over 100 commercial vessels, ferries, tour boats, and so forth, that all converged. All needed some measure of organization to pull that off, to identify where people needed to be picked up, whether it was piers or parks, or terminals, and then to get them to a place of safety. It could have been a disaster on the water in addition to the disaster that took place on land, had it not been coordinated and organized. So that's what the Incident Command did on that day. Now it has since been used for more general port security, and it's become part of the new normal of how we coordinate across multiple agencies. But as I mentioned, it didn't start on 9/11. We borrowed that concept of incident command from pollution response. And many of you are familiar with that, so I won't go into it in detail. Many of you are familiar because your oil spill response plans that you fill out as part of a permitting process include an incident command component to how you would manage a spill offshore. So you're very familiar with how that works. But the story goes a little bit deeper because it did not originate with pollution response. It actually the whole concept started with firefighting in the western United States. Massive wildfires, and for those of you who have been in the US this past summer, probably seen a lot of news clips. It seems to happen, almost every year there's some type of a massive fire response. They would draw firefighting elements from all over the country, and they had to organize as a team with a common purpose, common intent. And that's how the incident command system was born. It's bringing order out of all of those elements and attacking the problem in a coordinated way. They not only bring in firefighters, they bring in in many cases, military personnel, National Guard, and even international support. At different times, there's been support provided by Canada, by Australia, by New Zealand, and many others that all can plug in if they understand the incident command system. So that's where it started. So the point of this, and the point of even mentioning all this, is that one field of endeavor, port security, borrowed from another field of endeavor, pollution response, which borrowed from another field of endeavor, which is firefighting. All very different. They all required very different technical skills, but they all had an organizational problem that they had to solve. And that is just something of a metaphor for what we hope we can accomplish in this conference today. So again, the common purpose that we have here is trying to find practical applications of safety culture right down to the deck plate level. Our goal is to come up with some actionable recommendations that can help us achieve that. And we can see how other industries, other organizations have done so. And along the way, we're going to talk a little bit about social license, public acceptance of what this industry does. And the way I think of it, social license is really the necessary and desirable outcome of a positive safety culture. If people are convinced that you're operating safely, you have built a lot of goodwill. Now, along the way, we'll also encounter a number of core questions. I'm sorry, I'm just going to go to the end here because this is a distraction. We will touch on a number of core questions, such as, what is an acceptable level of risk? How do we define that? How do we better identify patterns of risk, especially the ones that are low probability, high consequence, a systemic risk? How do we get at that? How do we understand that? And how does it make sense to people who are doing work at the deck plate level? What's their role in that? And how can we better use data and simulations and modeling to help us understand that? We'll conclude sometime tomorrow with an exercise that'll hopefully bring it all together. But the real value in this is the dialogue, the interaction. We will break into different groups at different times, so I would encourage all of you, participate, share your thoughts and ideas. Most of all, enjoy yourself. I think these presentations should be very illuminating and very thought-provoking. So again, I will thank you for coming. Thank you for your participation, not only being here, but in advance for the active participation that I expect in the next 2 days. So I can stand up here and take a few questions if anybody has any. And it could be on anything I've said or should have said or any other topics. Yes, sir.
I've got a mic for you.
This may be a little early. I'm Tom Horan with Rowan Companies. I just had a quick question on what's the regulators' perception of industry safety culture as a whole as it currently stands right now?
Well, I won't speak for my colleagues, but we may hear over the next 2 days, how different regulators perceive the state of the industry. My personal perspective is that it's mixed. As I indicated, there's some that are absolute shining lights that really have this down. And as I've gone around and visited facilities offshore, it's pretty evident that employees get it. But I've also gone to others where it's not as clear that people get it. The real telling aspect of this for me is when we do have incidents and we look at root causes and we talk to people and we dig in deeply about how did the safety culture really help or minimize damage. It's not, in cases where it happens, it's not always evident that the safety culture had an effect. So again, it's a mixed bag, and it's probably what you would expect. The companies that tend to have very mature programs, I think overall have fewer accidents.
Okay, so maybe let's sit down for a minute. In a couple minutes, we'll chat. I had a couple of thoughts as I was listening to your talk today. So we've had the great many times where we can sit down and chat, but not everybody's been here to benefit from our conversations. And I know that you have a clear vision in the years ahead for where you'd like to see the offshore go. So could you spend a minute telling us a little bit about some of your vision and where you'd like to see things head in the next few years?
Well, we certainly want to maintain the focus on safety culture. We'd like to get it down to the deck plate level so that it's meaningful to people doing the work on deck. I am very fond of the notion that the best way to gauge safety culture is by looking at what people do when no one is really looking over their shoulder, or assessing how people behave when no one's watching them. That it's really built into the fabric of how they do their business. And that's hard to do because there's always competing concerns of cost and schedule that are just the reality of any industry. But the question is, when push comes to shove, will they adhere to a safe process? Will they avoid cutting corners in a critical process, and so forth? So that is what we would like, I think all of us would like to achieve. It's a very hard thing to pull off. But it's something that I think is absolutely essential as we go forward, that we continue that focus.
So you commented in your remarks in the front end, as all of us in the room are keenly aware with the low price environment, that it poses some unique challenges. People are very concerned about the financial security and stability of their company when the price of oil is down. So how do you feel this plays out with respect to overall safety offshore? Do you think we'll see an impact from people having to cut corners? What do you think is going to come out of this? Or do you have any concerns?
Well, it is a concern, and I've expressed it before, that oftentimes when you have a downturn in an industry, there's a lagging effect on safety. And it's usually a result of deferred maintenance, deferred training of people. You don't see the effects right away, but eventually it happens. Now, as I've gone around and talked with different companies, there's awareness of this. So to me,